Welcome to FarmSource Seasonal Focus, created as a way to share knowledge and advice on the season ahead. We're vets, agronomists, vendor reps, our team of technical sales reps, and sustainable dairy advisors, but most importantly, fellow farmers, share their insights in an easily digestible way.
Welcome to the second season of Seasonal Focus for FarmSource. For autumn, we will be focusing on the importance of worm burdens on farm and how to create an effective worm management strategy. To kick off, we're joined by Fonterra's Senior Veterinary Manager, Michael Shellcrass, who joins us now. Now, Michael, let's actually talk about a worm is not just a worm on farm. There's so many different variations, and why is it so important that farmers have a deeper understanding of the problem?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. There are lots of different worms. People think of worms as probably primarily the intestinal worms, the nematodes, but there are a whole lot of other classes of worm, and even within those gut worms, there are different species that are affected to greater or lesser degrees by different management practices, different environmental conditions, and different anthelmintic treatments like drenches.
And so therefore, there are different effects and different burdens on the animal at different times of year? Different times of year,
different classes of stock have different susceptibilities to different parasites. Some of the worms are more susceptible to drying in the pasture, and some are less susceptible to drying. So if, let's say you have a hot, dry period, some of the worms will die, but some of them will survive, and that's going to affect the pattern of parasite burden that goes into the next season. So it is complicated, and it changes from farm to farm, and it changes year on year. So it is important to reevaluate your parasite control program on a regular basis. And
is it always so apparent within the animal that there is a worm burden, or can it be subclinical?
Yeah, so that's a really important distinction between clinical and subclinical disease. And clinical disease is when there is an overt sign. You can see that the animal is scouring, or it's losing weight, or it's got dehydrated, or something like that. The vast majority of the production losses associated with worms is subclinical disease. So that is reduced growth rates primarily. In New Zealand pastoral farming systems, young stock are much more susceptible to parasites than adult animals. So by the time cattle or sheep get to about 18, 20 months of age, they're almost immune to worms. And so they are actually a really useful way of reducing the worm burden on your pasture. But up until that point, young animals are net shedders of worms. So they will be, or can be, quite heavily infected and putting more worm eggs onto the pasture than they're ingesting themselves.
And also you've got those abilities for daily monitoring when they're coming into milking, but in the young stock, what are some of those opportunities in your management practices where you can keep an eye on some of those things like growth rates?
Yeah, so and again, growth rates is probably the most significant thing in terms of subclinical disease, and there have been some good studies now done in New Zealand showing that even calves that are being regularly drenched have a lower growth rate if they're continually exposed to high levels of parasites. So managing the parasite burden on the pasture is really important at reducing that level of subclinical disease, and it involves more than just drenching.
Yes, Michael, we'll carry on in episode 2 of the Autumn Seasonal Focus for FarmSource and discuss the worm management strategy on your property. And there's quite a few tools in the toolbox that you can use.
Thanks for watching FarmSource Seasonal Focus. If you want to know more about the content featured in this episode, contact your local technical sales rep or talk to our store staff.